As if sandstorms weren't bad enough, Dubai was racked with even more problems after the failed evacuation led by the 33rd. The civil war between the damned and the exiles almost wrecked the city. It halved the strength of the 33rd, and it left them without a leader aside from Robert Darden, the radio man. As if they couldn't suffer enough, more trouble was brewing. Outside agitators working their way into the city, and soon the 33rd would be facing a problem even greater than their fight with the Exiles. I am, of course, talking about Grey Fox, the CIA op squad sent in to investigate Dubai and to figure out what was going on with the 33rd and to decide what action to take from there. There's a lot about Grey Fox we don't know. So much based on everything from testimonies and people in Dubai to visual evidence that we could recount that leaves things ambiguous. There are accounts that have not been backed up about their actions that we will need to explore to get a full grip on what they did within Dubai to bring it to its knees and to seal the fate of everybody inside. To start out, let's take a look at Grey Fox's composition. It was a 4-man team made up of Rick Gould, Fari and Castavin, Thomas Daniels, and Jeff Riggs. Based on the composition of the team, it appears that Daniels was the leader going into Dubai, although he didn't live to command the squad later on. We'll get to that, though. What is important is that when they successfully entered Dubai, the situation was dismal. Castavin had an initial intel report that painted a very grim picture of this city. In fact, it's unclear of how far into the occupation they arrived. We could assume it happened after the war with the Exiles and the Damned, if the city was in that poor of shape. Under the full strength of the 33rd, Konrad should have been able to maintain some sort of order and stability, at least before the failed evacuation. But the nightmare Castavin describes in his intel file suggests that the city was falling apart after the combined losses of the evacuation and the Civil War. The people were sick and tired of the 33rd's rule, and some of them were getting desperate enough to take up arms. And faced with this crisis, Grey Fox decided to aid them in that, turning on their own countrymen, recruiting the locals as an insurgency, giving them the arms and training and equipment they needed to take on the 33rd. What their goal was here is unclear. Rick Gould acted in the hopes of causing them to rise up and overthrow the 33rd, whereas members such as Jeff Riggs and Fari and Castavin had sinister plans for the city. What happened from here is left to speculation, but based on something we found within the reports on Dubai, a little-known operation known as Exodus, we can get a better picture of what happened between the end of the Civil War and the arrival of Delta Force. Bear in mind, the 33rd were a lot weaker now than they were at the beginning of the evacuation. The war with the Exiles had cost them a lot of material and a lot of men. Weapons like the M590 shotgun and M110 sniper system were gone. They had used up and destroyed so much of their equipment going to war with themselves. They were forced to scrounge up for busted up AKs and sawed down Winchester 1300s just to get by. It definitely didn't paint a good picture of how well they were maintaining their equipment. Even their heavies were basically guys in taped-together riot armor. They had to resort to looting to scrounge up enough armor for their Humvees, too. So that's why the insurgency initially had some successes. The 33rd were weak. They weren't ready for this sort of fight after fighting off so many of their brothers, after killing so many of their brothers. And Grey Fox took advantage of this. They made contact with a local guide named Fari, who was able to help them translate at the beginning of the Exodus operation. However, they lost contact with Fari at some point, and over the course of 3 days, their efforts to track him down would lead the squad to a disaster of unmitigated proportions. They had to fight their way through various locales to reach him and to rescue him, given how crucial of a contact he was. Exodus occurred over the course of 3 days, broken up into 3 different parts of the operation. After going on the run from the 33rd, they tried regrouping with Fari. They needed to get to a crashed plane to reach him. However, this attempt to make contact with him failed, and Fari was taken to a mall by the 33rd for questioning. They were fighting off the insurgents and doing a good job of it, forcing Gray Fox to take action. Notably, Castavin was nowhere to be found in these reports. It's unclear if he took a back seat to this operation, if he had sat it out deliberately, or if he was doing other operations, such as gathering intelligence, as we saw within Delta Force interactions with him. Regardless, Gray Fox was able to fight their way into the mall, and they managed to rescue Fari, but that only left them in a tighter situation. From there, Gray Fox had to fight their way to 33rd's helicopters that were in a nearby gorge. Well, some of them made it, based on mission reports. Riggs, Gould, and Fari did, but Daniels was captured. The end of day 1 resulted in the recapture of a local asset and the loss of their squad leader. Without Daniels, Riggs was the next person to take charge. Fari had known where Daniels would be taken, and he said that a direct assault would be impossible, and suggested a rooftop attack, starting by climbing a nearby super dune. This began day 2 of the Exodus operation, in which Gray Fox raided an outpost, took out a mortar that was being used to shell Gray Fox and the insurgents, and making their way to a brig that they had to cross over some more rooftops to reach. However, based on what's known, it seems as though they caught wind of Daniels being dead, or at least being bad enough to be considered leaving for dead. It would probably explain why nobody fell for the initial broadcast that the radio man did. In day 3, Riggs had fully taken charge with Daniels dead, and he was ready to take the fight to the 33rd. It's unclear if he wanted revenge for Daniels' death, or if he was just being pragmatic and wanted to capitalize on the loss, since he had a very aggressive approach to bringing down the 33rd. He wanted to take the fight directly to Konrad, who Gray Fox still believed was alive. Nobody in the 33rd had bothered to tell him about Konrad's fate, and why would they? Gray Fox had been sabotaging and hurting their war efforts, and had turned this already harsh occupation into a war zone. 33rd Brow for Blood, they did not want to negotiate with Gray Fox. They wanted them dead. To reach wherever they thought Konrad was, they needed a vehicle. So, the squad supported Fari as he opened up the path to some vehicles at a motor pool held by the 33rd. Riggs' plan was to reach a refugee tanker camp in the ship's graveyard. He wanted to recruit the refugees to fight with them. As such, the squad abandoned their vehicle on the 3rd day at the edge of the ship graveyard. They fought their way toward the tanker camp, which, although not directly said, is implied to have been protected by the 33rd. Eventually, they fought their way to what was referred to as Tanker 25. And, to Gray Fox's dismay, the tanker refugees were loyal to Konrad. They did not want Gray Fox's help. They'd seen how destructive Gray Fox was, how many people had died thanks to their revolution.
You leave my daughter alone! Get out of my house! I said get out!
So, they were reported, and the 33rd were quick to descend on the people who had caused them so much misery. Trapped inside the refugee compound, the squad had to hold out against the 33rd, waiting for air support to pick them up for extraction. It's unclear if this was an outside force aiding them, or if this was Castavin coming in with a stolen helicopter or some other support to aid them. The results of it seemed to be the scattering of Gray Fox, and from there, the splitting up of the team, their plans shifting. Gould still wanted to help the local population. He believed they needed to be rescued from the 33rd and the cruelty that they had inflicted and need to protect them. Riggs had seen things differently, and presumably Castavin had as well. Riggs envisioned a war between the US and the Middle East, seeing the entire region turn on America for what Konrad had done, and seeing America fail miserably to stop the crisis from consuming it. It's not clear if this would have actually happened. There are some very strong suggestions that Riggs was delusional in his goal. In fact, Gould called him out on this. Probably another reason why Gould was continuing to lead this revolution while Riggs had more underhanded plans in mind. But Riggs held that conviction, and Castavin seemingly supported him. Fari continued to work with Castavin, but presumably he was not led on about Riggs' new plan, which was to completely kill the city through dehydration. New plans involved taking control of the city's water supply, and presumably Gould had caught on to this, but had not pursued this goal. His objectives had still been to arm and assist the local insurgency. By the time Delta Force arrived in Dubai, the insurgency was pretty much beaten. They didn't have a whole lot going for them. Their most recent victory was an attack near the failed evacuation site, using a transmission of Konrad's apology tape post-evacuation to lure the 33rd into an ambush. This had the consequences of luring Delta Force in as well, which would prove disastrous for everybody involved. However, because of the insurgents' trigger happiness, they thought that Delta Force was part of the 33rd, and they'd come in to kill them as well. In the ensuing gun battles, the insurgents lost man after man, trying to hold off what they believed were members of the 33rd, but were actually Delta Force operators sent in to rescue them. They also managed to capture a member of the 33rd named Lieutenant McPherson for questioning, which Agent Castavin immediately got to work on. However, despite the efforts of the insurgents, Castavin couldn't get anything out of McPherson. Fari didn't think he could talk, but Castavin tried one last time to interrogate him, just as Delta arrived within the nest. This resulted in the death of Fari in the ensuing gunfight, and later on a confrontation between Delta, McPherson, and Castavin. Delta's intervention stopped McPherson from being shot, which resulted in Castavin being killed in turn by his own weapon. Unfortunately, McPherson, still badly battered from the interrogation and paranoid about these unknown people, did not believe them to be his rescuers. He believed that they were part of a CIA op squad as well, another aspect of Grey Fox, and that the entire thing had just been a fluke. This caused the 33rd to come into conflict with Delta, which was an entire other can of worms right there. The 33rd fought Delta under the belief that they were part of Grey Fox. And from there, what happened was poor communication killing plenty of people. The 33rd continued to use Daniel's final words, his final interrogation, as a way to lure Grey Fox out, probably unaware that they had already caught on to his death, hence why none of them were chomping at the bit to rescue him. What Gould was interested in, though, were the activities of Delta, who had proven far better at fighting the 33rd than anyone else. He was quick to rescue Delta from a trap set by the radio man, using Daniels, helping them to escape the Museum of Natural History within Dubai, and to get them to a highway system where the insurgents were battling against the 33rd. Unfortunately, the insurgents were doing poorly in this fight. A mix of air supports, strong infantry, and white phosphorus mortars brought the insurgency to its knees here, and it resulted in the capture of Gould. He was promptly interrogated by Randolph Dossler, an officer of the 33rd who specialized in interrogation and torture, with a unique practice called sandboarding, where bullets are fired into the sand nearby a person's face, with the high-velocity sand tearing away its skin, and the sound and heat causing them to be disoriented. The pain was enough to break even Gould when the threats of civilian death didn't work. What happened next was unclear. They found out the plan no matter what. The 33rd figured out what Gray Fox was planning, but it's unclear if Gould had cracked in time for them to talk. What is known is that Gould was deceased by the time Delta got to him, as indicated by a broadcast by the radio man celebrating his death. However, his plan to assault the city gate and rescue refugees that were taken there from the nest was misinterpreted by Delta Force as an attack plan, leading to the tragic use of white phosphorus mortars and the deaths of 47 innocent people. Gould, Daniels, and Castavin were all dead, plus Fari. That left Riggs as the sole CIA agent left, and he was going all in on his plan to destroy the city's water supply. Delta eventually caught up with them, and although there was extreme distrust, they eventually hashed out a plan to work together, and they cooperated as they began to raid the Dubai Aquatic Coliseum, with the insurgents, the remaining ones, acting basically as a diversion. Delta was disgusted with the practice, but they knew, as well as Riggs, that they needed a distraction from the 33rd to get close to the water trucks. By the time they reached the water trucks after an intense gunfight, Delta was practically ready to kill Riggs for his absolute apathy towards their lives and the lives of the people in Dubai. Little did they know this would be a taste of things to come. Eventually, while making their way out, Delta was not greeted as a liberator, but as a group of thieves stealing the city's water when it had been safely secured. Even if it was being rationed out, it was still in a safe place. And Riggs, this agent provocateur, had taken it along with Delta. The 33rd went all out in their assault to reclaim the water, using Humvees and turrets and even a Little Bird helicopter to try to stop them. Eventually they managed to find a way to box the trucks in, but rather than surrender them, Riggs initiated his final plan, having the trucks crashed. The ensuing destruction caused him to be badly injured, at the cost of the city's water supply essentially being destroyed. When Walker came to confront Riggs about it, finding him badly wounded and trapped underneath the burning truck, Riggs was not apologetic. He seemed almost relieved that the city was going to die of dehydration in 4 days. He believed that what he did was necessary, because otherwise many, many more people would die in his hypothetical Middle East-US war. Walker even recognized his insanity, but at that point Riggs was too far gone, physically and mentally, to really do anything about. The only thing left to do was to decide Riggs' fate. Let him burn under the truck, or give him one last act of mercy with his revolver. It's unclear which route Walker took, but Riggs' death was guaranteed, judging by his testimonies after the Dubai incident. Gray Fox came to an end there, but their legacy haunted Dubai until the arrival of Falcon 1. So many residents lost their lives thanks to their schemes, at least Riggs' schemes. Daniels and Gould might have been on the level, but Castavin and Riggs knew exactly what they were doing. They caused the destruction of the city, and the ensuing carnage that not even the Damned and Exiles war could match. It's a relief that Walker was able to get to the Burj Dubai and call in the evacuation when he did, or else things could have gotten far, far worse. Now, whether that evacuation call worked or whether the one done by Adams worked is still unclear, but that's a topic for another time. What does matter is that Gray Fox, their fate mirrored that of Delta's. They came to Dubai for a simple reconnaissance job with honest goals. And by the time their mission ended, they were pretty much monsters, shells of their former selves, dying in horrific ways and failing to achieve the basic goals they set out to do, instead pursuing very perverse and corrupt goals that would cause their own deaths and the deaths of so many around them, including the insurgents that had come to trust and rely on them. If there's a moral to take away from this, It's that war can change a man. It can make a man mad. It can turn a leader into someone who's willing to cause a citywide genocide. And even the most moral and upright people will resort to dirty tactics like guerrilla warfare to get out on top, such as Gould. The tale of Grey Fox in Dubai is a cautionary one, but it's an important one to remember. The 33rd, the few people that survived from there, as well as the survivors of the city, will remember Grey Fox. Not as heroes, but as the monsters who led the city to the brink of destruction. Thank you guys for watching. It was fun to go over the lore of the Grey Fox team, especially when we only know so much about them within the game Spec Ops. I used elements of the Exodus storyline that's in the game files to add on to what's known about them between their arrival and the arrival of Delta. I hope it ended up making sense, and I'll end up incorporating aspects of that into the visual parts of the video. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this as much as the Exiles video. If I get the chance, I'd like to do one on the Long Way Home DLC and how it might have gone, trying to interpret what might have happened with Adams and Sergeant Pazza. Hope you guys have a great day. Take care.